Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over 10 college football games for Saturday, November 18th in Week 12 of the college football season. And if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to put your college football picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the premium picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Week 12 in college football. First up, we see Rutgers and Penn State. This one's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern start time on Fox Sports 1. Penn State a big favorite in this game. I know it was a disappointing result for the Nittany Lions last week against Michigan, and the offensive coordinator was fired as a result. It was a 24-15 final score in favor of Michigan, and that game went under, but Michigan covered the spread, landed about 4.5, 5 points. Penn State, I still think one of the best defenses in the country, though. Honestly, probably top 5 in the country defensively this season. Against the run, they're only giving up 2.4 yards per carry. And against the pass, they have one of the best, more efficient pass defenses in the nation. Rutgers defensively has been solid this year, but last week, not a great result, giving up over 400 yards to Iowa. You just can't do that. Iowa, one of the worst offenses in college football, giving up those 22 points and those 400 yards. I really have concerns now going forward, even against a Penn State team that has struggled in these step-up games offensively. Penn State, other than playing Ohio State and Michigan, they've scored plenty of points this season. Overall, they're averaging 38 points per game. So I think they'll be fine in a game like this. I think it's a good bounce-back spot at home. I'm going to lay the points with the Nittany Lions laying that big number. Next up, we see Oklahoma and BYU. This one's going to be also 12 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN. We're playing with house money fading BYU these days. We did it again last week with Iowa State, another easy blowout winner for the Cyclones against BYU. And, BYU at the beginning of the season was one of the more fortunate teams in college football in terms of being in the plus category in the turnover battle. But recently, they're -3 against Iowa State, -1 against Texas and West Virginia. That's a concern going forward. The BYU offense actually wasn't that bad. And when you look at the numbers on paper in that game against Iowa State, but then you look at the fact that they only had 97 yards and 7 points at halftime in that one. Really a lot of garbage time scoring for BYU in the second half of that game, where Iowa State was up 31-7 at halftime, so they didn't really need to keep their foot on the pedal. But here's the thing, Oklahoma is a team that usually does keep its foot on the pedal. We saw it last week against West Virginia. The final score is 59-20. At halftime, it was 31-14, so Oklahoma goes out there and wins the second half 28-6, even though they're up big at halftime. They put up 644 yards in that game. Their offense and defense far better than BYU's in this matchup. I'm going to take Oklahoma and lay the big number on the road. Next up, we see FAU hosting Tulane. This one's going to be 12 o'clock Eastern on ESPN+. And I know FAU's hosting a ranked team in this ballgame, but this has been a program for the Owls that just hasn't had a very good home field advantage in recent years, especially when the team struggles. And this year's been one of those seasons where we haven't seen the Owls play well at home. We saw them lose to East Carolina outright 22-7 in their last home game, and we saw them lose 36-10 against UTSA. They only beat Tulsa by 3 points at home. They lost to Ohio, a MAC team, 17-10 at home, and then they beat Monmouth at the beginning of the season, an FCS opponent, but hasn't been a very good home team. I mean, they're scoring only 18 points per game at home, giving up 22 points per game. So the defense has been okay, but in a game against Tulane, a solid offense and an even better defense, I just don't think FAU competes in this one. Tulane giving up only 2.9 yards per carry on the ground. The pass defense has not been great down the stretch of the season, but I still think it's the better unit compared to FAU's. I'm going to take Tulane. I think they win this game by double digits. I'll lay the points. Next up, we'll go to the Mountain West as Hawaii takes on Wyoming. This one's going to be 2 o'clock Eastern. That's a pretty brutal spot, in my opinion, for Hawaii, who's coming off a nice upset win over Air Force 27-13. Makes it back-to-back wins for the Rainbow Warriors, 2 upset wins, actually, as they were underdogs in both games. But now they got to go back on the road against Wyoming, a really tough place to play. We know the Cowboys have been a completely different team when they're on the road compared to being in Laramie at home. We saw them upset Texas Tech at the beginning of the season in Laramie, but on the road this season, they're losing. They're only scoring 15 points per game and giving up 33. At home, they're scoring 29 points per game, so 14 points better per game offensively, and the defense 11 points better, giving up only 22. I think in this spot, the home team has done pretty well in this series. Wyoming's coming off a loss to UNLV, a pretty bad loss, 34-14. So I think there's value with the Cowboys in this one. I'll lay the points with Wyoming at home. Next up, we see Georgia and Tennessee, one of the better games for Saturday's card in college football. Not the best card in terms of entertainment value, in my opinion, but this is one of those good games, and we see a 3:30 Eastern start time on CBS, the game of the week on CBS. And, this might not be the most popular play, but Tennessee's been similar to Wyoming, one of those teams that just plays so much better at home than on the road. Joe Milton, as a quarterback throughout his collegiate career, has been a lot better at home than on the road. And while Tennessee's coming off an ugly loss to Missouri, 36-7, where they just really didn't compete on either side of the ball in that game, Tennessee has not lost a home game this year. They didn't lose a home game last year. This has been one of the better home teams in college football. Their only 2 losses last year were at Georgia and at South Carolina. And Georgia this year, as their 2 road games, they've only played 2 true road games. They played 1 neutral site game. In those 2 true road games against Auburn and Vanderbilt, you could argue 2 of the weakest, if not the weakest, teams in the SEC this year. They failed to cover against Auburn. They failed to cover against Vanderbilt. And it really wasn't close. They only won by 7 against Auburn, and they only won by 17 against Vanderbilt. So I'm not really in love with laying a big number, double digits, with Georgia on the road against a competent team, a team that's been a lot better at home, and a team we know is going to have a huge home field advantage in this ballgame, going to be super loud in Neyland. I'm going to go with Tennessee plus the points. I think there's value with the Vols after that loss to Missouri. This is still a really good team on both sides of the ball, in my opinion. Give me the points with Tennessee. Next up, we see Wake Forest and Notre Dame. This one, 3:30 Eastern on NBC. Pretty interesting matchup as Sam Hartman faces his former team. The Wake Forest really having a down season. They started 3-0, but they played pretty weak opponents in Elon, Vanderbilt, and Old Dominion. And now they're on a 3-game losing streak, their second 3-game losing streak of the year. Their last game against NC State, they gave up 379 yards to 163. They only had 8 first downs in that game, losing 26-6. They only had 45 yards and no points on the board at halftime in that game. That was a home game against NC State. Now on the road against a much better team in Notre Dame on both sides of the ball. I expect Notre Dame to run the ball at will in this game. Sam Hartman should have a big day. The defense has been one of the best in college football. I don't think Wake Forest does much of anything offensively, so this may look like a big number on paper, but I think it's certainly justified. So I'm going to lay the points with the Irish at home. Next up, we see Illinois and Iowa. This one's going to be 3:30 Eastern. It's going to be on Fox Sports 1. Now, call me crazy, but I like it over in an Iowa game. When you look at both of these offenses, they're coming off probably their best performances of the season. Illinois for sure against Indiana, 48 points and 662 total yards, over 500 passing yards in that game. And even before that week against Minnesota on the road, a decent defense, Illinois put up 27 points in that game in a win. So the Illinois offense starting to turn it on here in the second half of the season, but the defense not so much. I mean, they give up 45 points to Indiana, not what you want to see. Brett Bielema, known as a more defensive, first coach, but last year he gave up only 13 points per game. This year it's up to 29. So I do think Iowa's offense, who also played well last week, will have their opportunities to score some points in this game. I mean, Iowa put up over 400 yards against Rutgers. We talked about that earlier, and 22 points in that game. The defense for Iowa is really strong, but I think with this total so low, there's enough wiggle room for us to get over this total, even if the game's not really a high-scoring game. I mean, 21-17, we're way over the total. So give me the over here in Illinois, Iowa. I do think Iowa wins the game, but I think the better play's on the over. In our next game, we go to the Big 12 as Oklahoma State takes on Houston. This one, 4 o'clock Eastern on ESPN2. Now, we faded Oklahoma State last week. It was our play of the week on UCF. I just thought it was a really bad spot, and the value wasn't there with the Cowboys in that game. They were on a big-time win streak. They were off a big win against Oklahoma, their rivals, so it was kind of a letdown spot. It was in Orlando, in the rain, in the bounce house. It's just a really brutal spot for Oklahoma State, but after that blowout loss, 45-3, I think we're actually getting back to the value spots here with Oklahoma State on the road against who I believe, it's Houston and BYU, I think, are the 2 weakest teams in the Big 12. I think Oklahoma State, even in that game against UCF, they were moving the ball at the beginning of that game, especially just a couple of turnovers and mistakes really hurt that team early on, and then the game got away from them. But this is still a really talented team. They should be able to run the ball at will against Houston's defense. I think Bowman has a big day in the passing game as well. The defense for Oklahoma State, not my favorite, but Houston's offense has just not done much, especially in conference play. I mean, last week in Cincinnati, 241 total yards. It's not going to get it done. Only 102 passing yards. They were also -2 in the turnover battle. And I don't know how you could be negative against Cincinnati in the turnover battle this year. I think Emory Jones was born to turn the ball over in college football. But all joking aside, I just think Oklahoma State's a much better team here. And because of that blowout loss, we're getting a pretty reasonable price with them. So I'm going to lay the points with the Cowboys on the road. Next up, we see Coastal Carolina taking on Army. This one's going to be 12 o'clock Eastern on CBS Sports Network. Now, it may be surprising to some to see Coastal Carolina, a team with a 7-3 record, facing a losing record 4-6 Army team that lost to UMass, almost lost to Holy Cross, an FCS opponent. It may be surprising to see Coastal only a 4-point favorite in this game, but it just goes to show you it's tough to prepare against these triple option military style offenses where, Air Force, Army, and Navy, they run the ball almost every play with the triple option. And we saw it last week. UAB, Trent Dilfer, a first-year head coach who didn't have time to prepare his team, no bye week going into that game against Navy. And Navy was not playing great football going into that game, but they found the outright W. They ran the ball really well in that game. They executed correctly. And we see a very similar spot here with Coastal Carolina playing in its sixth straight week. Tim Beck is a first-year head coach. He hasn't played a triple option team yet this year. Army, I do think, will be able to run the ball. We've seen them, even though they've lost to UMass and have taken a couple bad losses this year, we've also seen them beat UTSA outright. They beat Air Force outright as a big-time underdog. So when Army executes, anything can happen. And I think in this spot, we're getting value with the home team. I don't think Coastal Carolina is going to be prepared for this one. Give me Army plus the points at home. Next up, we see Old Dominion and Georgia Southern. The final game we're going to talk about for Saturday's card in college football. Now, this one's 6 o'clock Eastern, by the way, on ESPN+. And I've mentioned a few times on the rundown this year that I think Georgia Southern is worth a look when they're playing a defense that doesn't put a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks, because Davis Brin is one of those quarterbacks that when he has time in the pocket, he's going to put up some of the best numbers in college football, a lot of yards, a lot of touchdown passes. When he's under pressure, he usually makes a lot of mistakes, a lot of interceptions. We saw that against Wisconsin where in Georgia Southern was -6 in the turnover battle, a lot of fumbles, a lot of sacks. But Old Dominion is just not one of those defenses that can really put a lot of pressure. They only have 13 sacks overall this year, about 1.3 sacks per game. It's just not going to get it done. They only earn sacks on 4% of their opponents' passing plays. So I do think Brin will have a lot of time in the pocket. Georgia Southern should have a big day through the air, but also on the ground. Old Dominion's defense has not been great against the run as of late. Old Dominion is on a 3-game losing streak. It's just not a team I really want to back on the road. And this is a pretty reasonable number, in my opinion, with Georgia Southern. So I'm going to lay the points with the Eagles at home. And that's it. Those are the games for Saturday in college football. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your college football picks in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.